Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and U 97.5 FM radio, Multicultural Radio, Hot Like Pepper Radio. Some of you have been commenting on the chat about the conversation just had with the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And there are about 7 or 8 of you who asked the question, when am I interviewing the opposition leader? I just want to indicate to those of you who might be concerned that I issue now an open invitation to the opposition leader of Trinidad and Tobago, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and that I had in fact invited her to speak to me tomorrow, Friday, but she declined and suggested that she might be available on another occasion. So I look forward to that, and I will be happy to interview her, as I would be happy to interview other members of the opposition and certainly members of the government, because people seek public office and therefore they must be accountable, and part of the accountability is to be willing to engage in issues and to answer questions. So I want to thank you for your interest in the program. I want to thank those of you who have made positive comments. Those of you who are not so positive, I'll try to always improve. And I want to let you know that this is an open show. It's an open forum, and anyone who wants to be on this program, who has a point of view or something to say, I am willing to have them on this program, but you have to be prepared to engage in issues and to respond to my questions. So I thank you very much for watching, and I thank you very much for listening. We have Professor Hamid Ghany on the show now, and we will have a discussion with him. Good morning, Hamid. Good morning, Professor Ghany.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Good. I hope you were able to see or at least hear the interview with the Prime Minister. I just spent a minute on that because we had to discuss other things. Did you see it or hear it?
I heard it. I heard the interview.
Okay. Any initial comments?
Well, I think you went very, very importantly into the whole issue of vaccine diplomacy, because I think that the understanding of that issue is something that is important for persons in the country to understand some of the international dynamics surrounding the acquisition and disbursement of vaccines, and also the fact that there are other issues arising around vaccine diplomacy. Some countries appear to be using it as a means of controlling immigration into their countries, and they're prepared to accept X vaccine but not Y vaccine, or X version of X vaccine.
Could you please, Dr. Ghany's volume, please? Yes. Yeah.
So I think that, on the whole, it was a very useful discussion about vaccines. And then going into the whole digitization transformation issue, I think is a critical one, and the Prime Minister seems to have adopted this issue of digital transformation. He spoke to it in his press briefing on Saturday, and I noted that he has taken certain actions at the ministerial level, and he has engaged you further in discussion this morning. So I think that those were 2 critical areas of discussion. Underlying all of that, of course, was the issue of the economy. And I think there's a lot more that can be discussed about the economy and opening up the economy and how we are going to live in the era of COVID-19, which appears not to be going away. And I think that was one of the predictions that had been made at an earlier time, that in a global sense, the world is going to have to come to terms with living with COVID and adjusting lifestyle habits, etc.
Okay, well, of course, you never have enough time to probe all of those issues. I hope the Prime Minister would agree to come back on another occasions, and I will certainly engage some of the ministers that he mentioned. I also want to engage the leader of the opposition. I had asked her if she'd come on the program tomorrow, but she declined and said perhaps another time. So I'm hope that she'll I hope that she'll make that soon. And I will also ask members of the opposition as well. I try to get a cross-section of people. And in the interest of democracy and discussion, we will have open discussions here. All I ask is that people be prepared to answer. If you come on this show, you have to answer. Professor Ghany, first of all, I want to welcome you and thank you for coming on the program. And because your time has been shortened because of the extra time we took with the Prime Minister, I want to ask you, before we even get into any discussion, if you'd be willing to come back again, because I know that as we start the discussion, we will not exhaust the issues that we have to discuss. So I wanted to ask you that, and we will make a convenient, mutually convenient time, and we'll have you come back again. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
I want to start with the issue of Tobago self-government and the fact that we have a bill before Parliament which is now in abeyance. It is going to carry over until September. And I want to ask you if you've looked at that bill and what are some of its strengths, if you think there are any, and what are some of its glaring deficiencies. Could we begin with that? Because I want to take you into a constitutional discussion. I know that you are a person very, very versed in Parliament and parliamentary matters, and very, very close to the issues of constitution and constitution making and the operation of constitution. So I will try to explore that expertise that you have, at least partially, in this program.
Yes, well, I think that the issue of internal self-government for Tobago is something that has been on the agenda for close to 50 years. And I think that, you know, we are in a space now where there is the political will to move forward with it. The bills that are before the Parliament, and particularly the Constitutional Amendment Bill, is a fundamental amendment to the country's constitution. And I'm surprised that there are many persons who are just viewing this purely as a Tobago matter, because it really is a national matter. And it is something that I think requires focused attention. I rather suspect that since the parliamentary controversies that arose the week before, came out into the open, people have now, sat up and said, okay, well, what's going on here? And I think that there needs to be an enlightened approach to this, primarily because, there's a whole history behind the disadvantage of Tobago in relation to Trinidad and the whole circumstance with regard to how Trinidad has dominated Tobago, continues to dominate Tobago, and as I'm seeing it in this legislation, will continue to dominate Tobago. I don't think Tobago is getting what it would really need to place it on an equal footing. And I know that there is a lot of dissent in civil society in Tobago. So I think that the parliamentary recess has come at a good time to sort of allow things to cool, press the reset button. Today is the deadline for the receipt of further amendments to the bills, etc., that the government has put out. And I'm hopeful that during this downtime of the parliamentary recess, that there can be some cross-party negotiations between government and opposition, because they're the ones who are going to make this happen at the end of the day. And that civil society in Tobago does get an opportunity to come in, because a lot of people are feeling aggrieved that what had been originally approved in terms of the London draft some 4 or 5 years ago is now no longer the case. And up to today, in today's Guardian, I'm seeing a letter by Deborah Moore-Miggins complaining precisely about that. So that there is disquiet in Tobago, and it is pointless to advance legislation if it is that the key stakeholders around the table
are unhappy. Yeah. So you think that there are many weaknesses in the bill that needs to be ironed out. You are calling for opposition and government collaboration on the bill if that's possible. You are talking about the disquiet in Tobago, about the whole matter. But one of the fundamental issues, and you also raise the issue of equality of Tobago, side by side we stand, so to speak. One of the fundamental issues in all of this is how will you pay, or who will pay, and how can Tobago pay more of its way? Would you like to address that for a minute?
Well, the issue of Tobago paying its way, there are a number of ways in which you can handle this. I see that they've gone from the 4.03% that the Dispute Resolution Commission had determined some years ago to 6.8% of the national budget. There was a demand in Tobago for 8%. An earlier incarnation of the bill had included 8%. As regards the mathematical formula for calculating that, I'm not entirely certain. But part of the argument that has been put forward in Tobago is that the marine resources around Tobago and some of these blocks for exploration and so on, ought to be more properly have that revenue directed to Tobago. So that once you get into that argument, it's going to become something that the issue of Tobago paying its way. Once that kind of argument arises, Tobago, I think, wants to get some more autonomy in terms of being able to make final decisions about its own future, while not disturbing the relationship with Trinidad, which is being recognized. So that one of the things that has arisen is the issue of the persistence of the unitary state. I'm on record as preferring a federal arrangement which will allow them the kind of equality that I think that they're searching for on a more comfortable basis. But that is a discussion that I think has to go on in cross-party negotiations or in further discourse with civil society in Tobago and civil society in Trinidad. I mean, I'm very surprised that civil society in Trinidad has taken such a sort of laid-back view of what is going on, as opposed to inserting themselves into the discourse, because, alongside all of this, the government of Trinidad and Tobago did have a couple of years ago some comprehensive proposals they wanted to advance on local government reform. And then that has gone by the wayside.
Yes,
but I think that local government reform in Trinidad, alongside internal self-government for Tobago, is a useful dual carriageway discussion to have.
Okay, but you are raising an important point here, and you are getting me into the heart of the matter that I want to raise with you, beyond the Tobago challenge and the Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago challenge, which is that you are saying that as we are discussing the business of autonomy for Tobago and the way Tobago basically governs the island, would not be a bad counterpoint for a discussion on the reform and transformation of local government in Trinidad. Can you explore that a little bit and talk about it? Because Tobago is unique. It is an island. It is separated from Trinidad by water. And you raise the issue of unitary state versus federalism as well. But all local government is in Trinidad. Basically the challenge there has been how to have what you might call greater power to local government and more autonomy of local government over the regions. Can you address that issue a little bit?
Yes, well, I think that, the issue of internal self-government for Tobago is really being conducted on the basis of granting devolved powers from the central government to the island of Tobago to create a Tobago Island government. And, it's going to resemble something along the lines of, but not exactly similar to, the devolved regions in the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, whereas England, to a large extent, falls under the Westminster government in London. So I understand the basic philosophy of what is being contemplated, and federalism is not on the radar screen of the Joint Select Committee at this time, nor of the government, from what I can see. But local government reform in Trinidad has been talked about for years and years and years across several administrations, and nothing really has happened on that front. And I think that it is for Trinidad civil society to get involved in this to ensure that we have some kind of basic reasonable discussion about the issue of internal self-government for Tobago, which is not a Tobago matter. It's a national matter that requires national.
Could you say that again so the population would appreciate and understand that?
Yeah, the issue of internal self-government.
The issue of self-government and internal self-government for Tobago is not a Tobago matter alone. It is a matter for Trinidad and Tobago.
It is. And what I'm saying is I'm surprised that civil society in Trinidad has remained as dormant as it has on the issue, because the economy of the country is going to be affected by whatever constitutional and political arrangements are established after this is over. The fact that the legislation is seeking to get a 3/4 majority in the House of Representatives and a 2/3 majority in the Senate confirms that it is the most deeply entrenched sections of our Constitution are being amended once you're doing that. And I'm saying that if we're going for that level of amendment, let us deal with at the same time, in this spirit of collaboration that is going to be called for, to put on the table some of the other things. For years, people have been talking about putting local government in the Constitution. Well, now is your moment. Now is your moment to put it in alongside the internal self-government for Tobago. You don't need to be specific, but you can insert something to the effect as Parliament may prescribe, and then you have a separate act that will deal with those details in terms of Trinidad. But in respect of what is going on, you have a central government in Port of Spain, and arrangements are being made to separate Tobago from that central government. Let Tobago look after its own affairs, so that the central government in Port of Spain is really going to be the government that's going to govern the island of Trinidad. And Tobago is going to be separated. Yet Tobago will have a say in the formation of the central government, because it has 2 seats in the national parliament that can tilt and determine which way political power may go. And I'm saying that let us not lose this moment to engage in the fundamental discussion that we need to have about the reforming of the way in which the governmental arrangements are set up to service the people. Because what is being set up in Tobago is fundamental and is designed to permit shorter lines of communication between the population and the political directorate, which will now be the political directorate in Scarborough. Whereas in terms of Trinidad, you have a number of regional corporations, borough corporations, city corporations, etc., and an elaborate local government structure that needs to have its power base enhanced in such a way that you shorten the lines of communication between citizens and their local authorities. But for whatever reason, that was being talked about with some degree of agitation in the last parliament, but seems to have gone asleep in this parliament. And I think that the time is right now to be able to just revive that discussion, if only to place it on the radar screen of what is a rearrangement of the manner in which the government engages the citizens in Tobago and the manner in which the government engages the citizens in Trinidad. And I think that this devolution model that is being used in Tobago is one thing, and a decentralization model is being talked about in terms of Trinidad. And I think that those two things make a very useful pair in terms of having a discussion. And I've been advocating for some time that we need to also address the issue of governance in Trinidad, because the situation is one that is crying out for some kind of attention.
All right, let's focus on that a little bit. Don't you think we need to use this moment, if we are going to talk about Tobago, we're going to talk about local government? I mean, shouldn't we address the whole issue of constitutional reform in Trinidad and Tobago? I mean, it is something that has been on the agenda off and on. We had the Republican Constitution of 1976. And since then, we've had debates about it. Prime Minister Manning has raised it. Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Bisesa has raised it. And there have been discussions publicly on the matter, but we have not gotten to the point of making any serious and significant constitutional reform or transforming the constitutional apparatus in Trinidad and Tobago. Would you say that the time is ripe now to address the whole issue of constitutional reform, and especially in the context of this post-COVID era that is going to emerge, in which basically the COVID pandemic has not only showed the severe economic disparities and vulnerabilities in countries across the world and among countries themselves, but it has also shown the manner in which constitutions can be abused and power can be usurped by elected officials and the population sort of kept in corral, so to speak. Could you comment on that? Because I know you have a deep understanding of these things.
Yeah, well, I think that, in the same way that we've spoken about vaccine hesitancy, there is the issue of constitutional reform hesitancy. I mean, there's a lot of talk, and I think that it is a discussion that goes on among political elites. But for the average man in the street, an average woman in the street, you're not getting that kind of deeper discussion on the issue. And the situation has remained largely intact. And it's not a Trinidad and Tobago phenomenon only. It is a phenomenon quite across the region. I mean, when you look at the fact that Grenada has made 2 attempts, 2016 and 2018, to bring in some new measures in the constitution. Of course, their constitution requires that they have a referendum to approve the measures. And the referendum had, 1, a low voter turnout, 32%, and 2, the 32% who turned out on both occasions voted no on every single proposal. And then Antigua and Barbuda tried in 2018 to get on a specific issue of replacing the Privy Council with the CCJ. Low turnout, about 33 or 34%, and you had those who turned out voting no on the measure. St. Vincent and the Grenadines tried in 2009 fundamental constitutional reform, brand new bill after 6 years of public consultation, and a bill prepared based on what was said at these consultations, and you end up with the constitutionally mandated referendum producing a result where less than 50% of the population supported the measure, and a 2/3 majority in the referendum was required. So I am not sensing that there's any groundswell of desire for constitutional reform in the region among the wider population. It is, however, something that attracts the attention of political elites who would like to see the system being changed in a particular way. And I think that that disconnect is part of the reason why nothing has happened, really. I mean, in some of the public consultations that are mandated, and I've had the opportunity to see a couple of those public consultations myself, you don't get any big turnout in terms of people coming out to talk about this. And I think that, we have to analyze what is it exactly that people are talking about when they talk about constitutional reform. What is before the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago right now is fundamental constitutional reform. It is going to reorganize the powers of the state. And that is why I'm saying that I'm surprised that civil society in Trinidad has taken such a laid-back approach on these measures, and that only Tobago civil society and Tobago society seems to be agitated about it. But once you rearrange the power structure in respect of Tobago's relationship with Trinidad, you are engaging in fundamental constitutional reform of Trinidad and Tobago. And I think that, now that all this controversy about these bills has arisen in the public domain and some of the theatrics surrounding some of what has gone on, I think that there is perhaps a moment now for people to sort of sit up and look at this, because this is constitutional reform not in the traditional institutional way that has been discussed before, changing the parliament and the electoral system and changing a number of other things. Now we're talking about rearranging the foundations of the state. And that is, to me, a fundamental piece of constitutional reform. And you can tell because of the sections that are being amended and the fact that you need a 3/4 majority in the House of Representatives and a 2/3 majority in the Senate. This is fundamental constitutional reform. And I'm saying let's grab this moment now and latch onto it to be able to address the issue. Even if you just have to leave something in the Constitution that speaks to maybe local government, as part of the Constitution as may be prescribed, and that the prescription will come in the form of subsidiary legislation at a later date, and that the issue of Tobago be recast in terms of engaging civil society in Tobago in such a way that they can trust the process. The history of internal self-government discussions in Tobago is one whereby there's a deep distrust of whatever goes on in Port of Spain in relation to Tobago. And I think that the political operators need to understand that level of distrust. That you make a little change here, a little change there, there is something sinister behind it in terms of the minds of many. And you can't just discount that because of the long, long period of political disadvantage and hurt that has taken place over many years.
We just have 30 seconds before the news, and I just want to, would I be very wrong if I said that what is happening with this bill is that it's going to entrench a political oligarchy in Tobago? Varnus James says political dictatorship. And more than that, it is going to give Trinidad no say in what happens in Tobago, and Tobago will continue to have a say in what happens in Trinidad. And therefore, the whole constitutional apparatus needs to be addressed so that all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago could be part of the governance wherever they live. Am I wrong in taking that view? Am I too wrong in taking that view?
No, I think that, and that's why what you've just said makes the case for why civil society in Trinidad needs to get involved. Because this is not an exclusive Tobago issue. The end product is one in which you are giving Tobago a new architecture in terms of how to govern itself. But what you are doing is you are restructuring the architecture of Trinidad and Tobago to restructure an architecture in Tobago which will leave a revised Trinidad in its wake. And I'm saying that we need to address this issue more fundamentally and not disregard it. So I'm saying that we have arrived at a point. Let us use the parliamentary recess, July and August, to be able to perhaps have a rethink of what's going on, come back in the new session of Parliament, and give this some kind of meaningful engagement. Because, someone asked me the other day, so does that mean that if Tobago can make its own laws, something that's wrong in Trinidad could be right in Tobago, and something that's wrong in Tobago could be right in Trinidad, and you have two different platforms? And I said, yes, that's quite possible. But the deeper issue of lawmaking and assent to bills and so on is a high-level constitutional discourse about the powers of the president and whether the president is going to be advised by cabinet when to assent to legislation, when not to assent to legislation. And we need to look at all of these things because this is going to hit the population like a ton of bricks. And they're going to wake up and ask themselves, well, what happened there and how did we end up here? And I think this is where we need some more enlightened discussion.
Yes, all right. Well, Professor Ghany, I want to thank you very much for being on the program this morning. I want to apologize for cutting some of your time because I did tell you we would start at 7:20. But we did have a good discussion, and you promised to come back again, so we will continue this discussion of constitutional reform. And I wish you a good day. Thank you very much. We hand over now to Chanel Al-Suran for the news. Thank you for watching Brighter Morning, and I look forward to engaging you tomorrow. We have two very, very exceptional guests, so thank you very much.